pertinent to today, nonetheless. He argued that socialism will eventually lead to a totalitarian form of government, because the economy being controlled in one way or another by the government results in the eventual control of people and loss of freedom. Here's a quote from his book. "I now have an unpleasant truth to say, that we are in danger of the fate of Germany. Few people are willing to recognize that the rise of fascism and Nazism was not a reaction against the socialist trends of the previous period, but an inevitable result of these trends." So Hayek was afraid we might go swiftly down the path of socialism, especially because we were allies with the Soviet Union. Does anybody remember well, I don't know. I wasn't alive back then, but my grandparents were, and believe me, I mean, full disclosure here, I've been an anti-socialist since I was a little kid. So I'm not a reformed, free market person. No. I've been schooled and taught, and it's been ingrained. It's part of my DNA, and you'll find out shortly why. But the nickname for Joseph Stalin was Uncle Joe, right? He's our friend because the Soviets were our allies. And so it was not too far-fetched to believe that it would be easy for us to accept and adopt their form of things because, after all, they were our blessed allies that helped us defeat those Nazis or those Nazis. But Germany was a socialist, and they were as socialist as any country has ever been or had been. So communism and socialism, sorry, there's really no difference. No difference. The government controlled the media at that time in the Soviet Union as well as in Germany, or propaganda as it's commonly called. Propaganda, by the way, was never really a bad term until after the Ministry of Propaganda, because they used it entirely for evil. They controlled the education institutions, the economy, and all areas of life. And the Soviets were no different. And things, frankly, are not much different today. The Nazis controlled all newspapers, printing houses, movies, and texts. The Soviets would go as far as to send out new pages to replace the old pages of encyclopedias. So, for instance, they'd hand out an encyclopedia in 1920. Everybody would put it in their house because this is the state-approved version of history and knowledge. And they controlled it so well that if, let's say, so-and-so fell out of favor, and now he was a enemy of the state, they'd create a new page for this person, they'd mail it to your house, and they'd say, cut out the old page, throw it away, and put this new page in. All right, obviously this is before social media and it's before the internet, but that can easily be done on the internet. When the internet first came out and they started with putting encyclopedias on the internet, they put, me being a musician, the big thing was the New Grove Dictionary of Music, which is the consummate dictionary of music for the entire planet. And the big thing, we can go in there and change, make corrections. One of the problems that you have when you produce encyclopedias and such large volumes is you have many different people that are specialists in their areas that are dedicating time to write articles and submitting them to be put in these publications. Well, that takes years to do and to edit. So usually every 10, maybe even 20 at the most years, they will send out new editions of things. Well, by the time they send out their new edition, it's already old. It's old news. It's kind of like getting your evening newspaper. Everything's already happened. Everybody already knows what happened. So by putting things in a digital format, they could change it, and do updates all the time. The problem is they don't tell you when those updates are made. So when you go to BLM's website and all of a sudden it looks different, it's because they changed something because something wasn't quite right. Don't you remember? The first thing I did when all this stuff started happening over a year ago is I went right to their website to see what they supported and what their views were about particular things. And they had on there clearly that they wanted to they didn't use the words destroy, but to basically eliminate and change the family dynamic. Eliminate the nuclear family, everybody's a child of the state type of thing. And well, that's not on there anymore. That doesn't mean they don't believe it. So Much easier to change things nowadays. That's why you have screenshots of everything. That's how they catch all those people on Twitter that say things they shouldn't have said, and then they delete their Twitter page, but someone took a picture years ago. Boy, you can't run for office nowadays without being found out. Just understand that. So the Soviets would go so far as to do what I told you. And in those regimes, and it's similar today, there was no room for dissent. Right? I can remember even 5 years ago, you could have a discussion with somebody. You wouldn't be spat upon or just yelled down or completely shamed online. And now if you dissent, you're done. You're going to lose your job, right? Even your own family members might completely desert you. You'll be marginalized. You'll be vilified, demonized. Oh, it's terrible. Today we have fact checkers, although nobody knows who they are, and outright censorship on all social media, YouTube, everywhere else. Even your feeds are put through an algorithm to fit your likes and tastes. What was intended for entertainment is now a news source. The news feed, how dare you call it a news feed? This was all created to make money, create data, and manipulate people. Now, one thing my mother taught me when I was younger, to not let anyone manipulate you. I hate being manipulated. I hate being manipulated so much that I'll often, if I feel like I'm being manipulated, I'll just automatically do the opposite, which I suppose is a form of manipulation right there. But only if they understand that. So don't allow yourself to be manipulated, and understand when you go on to Facebook, when you go onto any of those, Twitter, whatever, it's all there for you. It's what you like that they're sending you. So if you just not like everything, and especially advertising, just before you know it, you'll start getting foreign advertising because there'll be nothing left here for you. So it just puts it through. You can screw with their algorithm if you want to, but that's a waste of time too. There are better things you can do with your time than that. So I'm going to give you just a few anecdotal things of things I've learned in my life and from my family. And well, my family is originally from the country of Latvia, the Republic of Latvia, which is in one of the old Eastern Bloc states. And the first time I went there to visit with my grandmother, she wanted to take me back to see the family. And so that was in 1986. So I'm not going to tell you how old I was, but I was young or younger. And some things about just because that system the Soviet system's been gone for a while, so there's probably, especially the younger people that don't even really know what it was like to live under that, or how they viewed the world or how we viewed them. But the ruble exchange rate, the ruble is the Russian ruble was the official currency of the Soviet Union. They had an exchange rate that was a false exchange rate. It was like, I don't know, it was I think $1.85. You could buy a ruble for $1.85 in American currency. And so when you would go there to visit, you would in order to buy anything, unless you went to their special dollar stores where you could buy Western goods and pay dollars. And then of course they would keep those dollars. But what they would do is exchange the money for that rate, and then you'd have to buy their rubles so you could take your friends and relatives out to dinner and buy things and go places and go to the theater or do anything or even donate money to somebody. You were not allowed to use dollars anywhere than in the dollar store. You had to use rubles. So they exchanged that money. And then when you left, you weren't allowed to take rubles out with you. So you had to exchange it back into dollars. Or you think they gave you a dollar back for every $1.85 of rubles you had? No. It was pretty much, so they made money, they were money changers. That's how they made money, because the Russian ruble was worth nothing outside of the Soviet Union, right? It wasn't exchanged on currency markets like the dollar is and the pound and all of those. It was worthless. It was just a cheap piece of paper that they printed. And so that's one way they controlled things. Another interesting control thing was their voting system. So they normally had one candidate that would run for something, because why would you want anyone else, right? You wouldn't have two competing candidates. That would be ridiculous, because everybody knows that this one person is the right person, so why would you want anyone else? So then you might think, well, why would you even want to vote? What difference does it make? It makes a difference to them because they want you They want your support. This is the way they show the world that we are united. We are all one. And they make you feel like, why wouldn't you want to vote? So where do you vote? Well, you go to work. Everybody goes to work, and then before you go on your shift, they have a little voting box, and then you vote. You throw in your ballot. But if you want to resist a little bit, I'm not going to vote. You just stay home. Well, guess what happens when you stay home? Before you know it, your supervisor shows up after your shift and knocks on the door and says, "Just vote." And puts the ballot box right in front of you. They come up with a truck and they take you outside. Just go ahead. Just vote. Here's some vodka. Just vote. Just vote. Right? I'm not even being facetious. That is exactly how it was done, because it was important and if you didn't vote, right? Medical care, yes, it was all universal health care. It was a pretty lousy system too. And I had actually, my wife has a relative, a cousin, who either her father or uncle was terminal with cancer. So what do they do? When you're terminal, you have no more use for the state. So what do? They send you home. Right? Do they come home to take care of you? Do they give you morphine? Do they give you, that would be a waste to give you those things, because you're not worth anything to the state anymore. You're going to die. So they would send a nurse over, maybe just to check, to actually make sure they're still alive or have passed on. And then someone has to take care of this person, or you can just leave them there. So anyone with any soul at all would want to stay home and take care of a family member. So things are pretty dismal. And granted, this was near the end, but socialism, these are the fruit of socialism, because you are only worth what you are worth to the state. Right? There is no human element at all. Right? When I went, I spoke with the one member of my family that would even talk openly about anything. Everybody else, they it was all small talk, visiting. They didn't want to talk about their life, because, well, first of all, there are microphones everywhere. So they would only talk openly, if at all, out in a park, or while you're walking down the street, or walking on a beach someplace. And the one who was free, I found out later, the one who, and he was actually pretty indignant about things and very bitter, unfortunately. But he had been originally a professor at a tech school. And for years, they were pressuring, not for years, probably a few years, were pressuring him to join the party. If you are a teacher, or you are a politician, if you are a doctor, anyone in a place of importance, you have to be a party member, right? You have to be a card-carrying party member. And so he just didn't want to join. And so they kept, and it wasn't like, are you going to join or not? It was like, hey, come to the party gathering. Yeah, and then they go, oh, just go, you know what? You can go over to that table. And then you go over to the table. Oh, here's your party card. Just sign right here. It's all very, it's just very easy to walk down that path, right? And they finally one day just said, are you coming or not? And he said, no. Okay, well, that was that. So things were fine for a little bit, but then all of a sudden, you're not, we don't think you're teaching that well. We don't think this is a very good job for you. So we're going to remove you, right? And it's never you're removed because you didn't join the party. You remove it, but nothing is ever the way it seems. Most people, when they give a reason for doing something or not doing something, it's almost never the real reason. It's like when people quit their job and they go to HR to say why they're quitting. It's not always the real reason why they're giving, right? They say some other reason. Oh, I want to change, right? It's because you don't want to, for a lot of reasons. Maybe you just don't want to tell them because you don't think they deserve to know. You're sick and tired of them, or you just don't want the hassle. Well, he decided to stand his ground. Then he ended up working in a factory, and then he told me, he said, and this was the crowning moment of my education there, about how you resist in a system like that. Because, we're not there yet, but we may get there soon. Maybe in my lifetime, if things don't change for the better. But at some point, you have, if you don't want to just end up being thrown in prison or shot, and you still want to resist, you have to find other ways to do it. So this is the way he did it. He said, you go to work, and you find every reason possible not to work. He said, it's someone's birthday, you go to their department, you celebrate their birthday for 15, 20 minutes. Oh, someone just had a baby, now you go over to that department and celebrate. Oh, it's someone's names day. You know, they have names days that are similar to birthdays. Let's go, oh, someone's grandmother just had a birthday. You know, whatever reason you had to not work, and then occasionally you do a little shoddy work. And then he said, when you left, you took a nail, you took a pencil, anything you could put in your pocket that wasn't obvious, you just took it. You left machinery running, you left the lights on, anything to bring the system down. And that is what brought that system down. That is what brought that. They had no resources left. They couldn't afford things. And so they had to modify. Why do you think glasnost and perestroika and all those policies that they had when Gorbachev became the premier at his time? Because he realized we're going to go down burning if we don't make some changes. So hopefully it doesn't get to the point where that's how we have to force changes here. So he didn't get along with other members of the family, by the way. That I remember him telling me, we were all sitting together and he just said, you know, we don't all get together like this all the time. He said, I don't get along with those people. And then he started accusing the two teachers that were there for joining the party, and boy, did they get upset. And they said, don't you realize we didn't have a choice? It's better that we're teachers than some Russian coming in and teaching, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? I judge no one. I don't judge any of them because I have not lived that life. So, which is another thing you have to come to grips with. The relative who suffered under that system became so bitter that it just destroyed his life. So you have a choice. If you're going to resist, you need to forgive those who have persecuted you for the resistance. You just need to forgive. If you don't forgive, you'll drive yourself crazy. And you need to forgive the others who are complicit to some point. Doesn't mean you have to, hang out with them and act like nothing ever happened. But you have to forgive. I mean, think of yourself. Put yourself before Christ, who knows everything, and have him look at you and see what you've been forgiven of. There's a lot of stuff. I think of what he's done for me. Praise Jesus. So don't die a bitter person. In Ephesians 4:31 and 32, it says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Matthew 18:21, 22, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? And we all know what Jesus answered. I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. It's easy to read those words, but often hard to live them. In 1 Peter 3:9, do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. Luke 6:27, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. We are not at the point where resisting the ills of the present system is not possible, but the day may not be far when it does become impossible. When the ruling class controls everything about your day-to-day life, it becomes difficult to dissent without severe repercussions, like the loss of life, family, property, and the like. So passive resistance becomes the primary tool of choice for most people. There will always be those who are just going to resist butt heads, right? And those are the dissidents. Those are the people that we cheer on, although quietly often. You might have to do that. But most people, 80, 90% are going to, be the passive resistors. It's the only way you can survive. So a little bit of background about Latvia and the Soviets, and this is my little history lesson here. So how many of you have heard of the Nonaggression Pact? All right, a handful. You actually went to school when they talked about that stuff. So the Non-Aggression Pact in Europe is referred to as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, because Molotov was the the foreign minister of the Soviet Union at the time, and Ribbentrop was the foreign minister of Germany at the time. And this was a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union that enabled those two powers to divide Poland between them. There was also a secret agreement that was part of this that allowed the Soviets to take the Baltic states. This, by the way, they found out only at the Nuremberg trial that they even had made this secret negotiation. It was signed August 23rd of 1939. And when is what is considered the date when World War II started? September 1st of 1939, which was a little over a week later. That's when Germany invaded Poland. And then soon after, the Soviets annexed the other half of Poland. After occupying eastern Poland, the Soviets pressured Latvia and the other Baltic states to conclude mutual assistance treaties. This allowed the Soviets to put military installations in the Baltics. And on the morning of June 15th of 1940, which was nearly a year later, Soviet troops carried out an attack on Latvian border posts, killing 5 people and taking 37 as hostages. By the way, no one knew that the Soviets did this until recently, and for the last 25, 30 years, that when they started opening up records and things were freeing up, they finally proved that they had done it. But it was a staged attack. At the time, it was not known that they had done this, and the next day, the USSR accused Latvia of violating the Mutual Assistance Treaty and demanded the formation of a new government and allowed entry of an unlimited number of Soviet troops into the country. And then the Latvian president, to all Latvians, made a very famous speech. He went on the radio and said, "I will stay where I am and you will stay where you are," meaning that we're not going to resist because they would have just been annihilated. And then they, of course, took the president, took him out to the forest and shot him in the head. Never found his body. Only recently have they even discovered possibly where it was, just from documentation that they found and so forth. So vicious people. When the Soviets also occupied Latvia during the war for just a little over a year, before the Germans came through and pushed them back, they had tortured many, many people. They took anyone that had been a previous president of the country was tortured, and just tortured you. But they tie wire around your neck and just torture you to death. There's just no reason for doing that. But when people in power attract those type of sadistic, masochistic people to be their henchmen, you just can't believe that they can do stuff like that. But they did. So once they took over, they gathered lists of people for deportation. They organized series of mass deportations from Latvia in 1941, as well as 1945 to 1951, once the war was over, in which around 60,000 inhabitants of Latvia were deported to remote areas of the Soviet Union. You have a country that has a population of 2 million, and 60,000 of them were deported. And why? Well, often dropped off in areas of Siberia to build their own barracks and camps. They're just dropped off the train and say, "Here you are. There's a bunch of wood over there. You're gonna have to fell some trees. Here's an axe." They in the middle of winter. So it's not even they built their own gulag. Many died on the way or soon after arriving, and many of those who were allowed to return, starting only in 1955, were emotionally and psychologically scarred for life. And some of them never returned. They just kind of were released there and made a life in Siberia. And that's not just Latvia, that's also Estonia, Lithuania, and many of the other satellite states, right? Latvia was not considered a satellite country because they, as far as Russia, even now, still views it as their territory that was taken away from them because it was part of the Russian Empire. So every day they want to annex it. And that's why Latvia is a big supporter of the United States, why they joined NATO, and the EU was to have some sort of protection because they are literally right on the border of Russia. So that's a little background about what the people that were still there had to live through. And there's another relative of my wife's. Her name is Bittite, which means little bee. And what's that? Oh, that's her nickname. Yeah, everybody has nicknames, and probably rightfully so you can disguise your identity at times. But she was just a young girl as the war ended, and her family, her entire family, immediate family, was sent to Siberia. And but her story is she happened to be in school the day that they came to get her family. And so she was in the class, and the school principal came to the teacher and kind of whispered in the teacher's ear, and probably whispered something like, the police are going to come to get her. And so she had a decision to make. You can either just stand there and hand her over to the police, or you can try to protect her. So she decided to protect her. She took her to the cloakroom, which is usually in the back, and said, I want you to stay behind these coats, and I don't want you to say anything or make a noise until I come back and get you. And so the police came looking for her, and she just said, no, they're not here. Yeah, she didn't come to school today, and so they left. And then she went back, and so her family was sent to Siberia. She ended up having to live with other members of the family, right? So, there are people that are helpful and don't trust the regime, don't want to be part of the regime, but you're taking your life in your own hands often when you resist in such a manner. But you can believe that she's grateful to that person. But I had the chance to talk with her in 1993, and this was just after the Latvia had pretty much declared itself free again. And so now Russia said, oh, you're a free country? Okay. Well, we don't have any agreements, any treaties for goods, and especially natural gas or fuel oil and things like that. So they decided right before winter to say, well, since we don't have any of these agreements, we're not going to sell you any fuel oil or natural gas. And they were trying to obviously pressure them into some high stakes, or even come back and join what was it called then? No, it wasn't the Warsaw Pact. I mean, yes, that does exist, but it was the Confederation of sub-states, or Soviet states, or something like that. The Russian Confederation, which was one of the terms used. They wanted them to come back and join that. And I remember her telling me, because I was wondering about that, I said, what happened there? And she said, well, two things. One is that we told them we will never go back. She said, we'll freeze to death before we go back, right? And after living through that, you have that type of chutzpah and that type of desire to never turn back. I mean, what's the difference? Freeze to death or live under your tyranny? So those are questions you have to ask yourself. And she also said, and then the black market opened up, and the gasoline as well as fuel oil for heating and natural gas was flowing over the border illegally so much that the Russians gave up in about a week. So black markets also flourish. Let me tell you, when you saw someone, I was told, when you saw someone standing in a line, you'd get in it. You didn't even know it was at the end of the line because you knew it was something good. And then you just kind of ask people what's in the line, and then they tell you, and then you might stay in or get out, right? And production, when everything is controlled, and then usually you end up having idiots run things, right? Another story, and this is truth, and it sounds so stupid, but it's truth, and it's two stories quickly. One is, for instance, you'd have a factory. And they said, this month we're going to make telephones. It's very efficient to make one thing. You're tooled for one thing, you make one thing. We're going to make telephones. So you make 100,000 telephones. All right, now the month is over. You've been selling those telephones, giving them away to people, and they all have telephones. So now this next month you're going to make umbrellas. So you start making umbrellas. Well, now someone's telephone breaks and they need a new telephone. But they're not making telephones anymore. So there are no telephones left. And so there's scarcity, but you need a telephone. So you go to your neighbor and say, well, can I have your telephone? And what does the neighbor do? Everyone is a free market enterpriser individually, ultimately. You say, well, you know what? I actually have this extra telephone here, and I'll give it to you for what ends up being double what it originally cost. And then you get that telephone. Well, then that creates a hysteria. So now everybody goes and buys as many umbrellas as they can find, because they know that next month there aren't going to be any umbrellas. And before you know it, you have a black market going. So that's how ridiculous trying to control supply and demand. You can never control demand. And then another interesting story is Khrushchev when he came to the United States, and he anybody remember who Khrushchev was? Right, the guy that beat his heel on this and said, "We do not have nuclear missiles in Cuba. We will bury you." Yeah. Who's buried now? So but he said he saw our cornfields. And he said, "Look at this. We have to do this in Russia." So they went back to Russia, and the Central Planning Committee said, "Okay, we are going to plant. We have corn seed, and we're going to plant it on this day, and then we're going to harvest it on this day. So put it on your calendar." Yeah, well, yeah, you're all chuckling because that sounds ridiculous. And some of you aren't even farmers, right? But that's exactly what, and then, when you have been taught to obey and not to resist or dissent or even question, what do? You're the farmer, you go ahead and do it. So, okay, it's time to plant. But sir, there's still snow on the ground. But sir, it's raining. Or, but sir, the fields aren't ready. Plant the seed. They planted the seed. Well, needless to say, the harvest was terrible. So they never planted corn again as a crop. And it doesn't grow well. They're mostly barley, wheat, and those types of things because of their climate. So anyway, Central disaster. After the first round of deportations, the Germans pushed the Soviets back to Russian territory. My family found out that they were on those lists that they were making. They were on future lists. So that's the reason why they left the country. And they retreated with the Germans after a few years of being under German occupation, which wasn't all that great either, I might add, but we won't talk about that right now. So during the wartime occupation, my grandfather lived on a farm. That was his homestead. But the reason why he was a lot of farmers weren't on the list because after all, farmers grow things that you can eat. But if you were in the intelligentsia, if you were a journalist, if you were a doctor, anyone that might actually potentially resist, they got rid of you. So they lived, and he had been a music critic during his career. So he was technically a journalist. And when he retired, he moved back to his homestead. And so that's why he was on the list, and his family. So they decided to leave. But while he was still there, and during the first Russian occupation, they lived on a farm, and next door to another farm, which was actually owned by some cousins of his. And the person who was the husband of the person that lived there was the local police precinct president. They called him the police president. So he was a leading figure as well as a policeman. So those are the first people they rounded up. If you were an officer in the Latvian army, they rounded you up and just shot you in the forest, right? Didn't even bury you. So, and that's the reason why my wife's grandfather deserted the Latvian army. He said, I heard they were shooting officers. He was the equivalent of a drill sergeant, which was an officer status in the Latvian army. So they just left. You got to save your life. At some point, you have to flee, which I would also recommend at some point if you feel the need to. So anyway, he had been taken and shot, and my grandmother as well as my grandfather felt compassion for it. What's happening? They went to visit them a couple times, brought them some food. And why did they do that? Because no one else would. You know how it is to be associated with I'm not going to let anyone even know that I know them, or they're going to round me up too. You're isolated, you're demonized, you're vilified, you're a pariah. Don't let that happen. Don't let that happen. If it happens to you, I promise I will come and visit you. I will make sure you have food. No one deserves to die of starvation just because of that. Right? So I'm actually very proud of my grandparents for doing that. And they did the same thing in their own farm, where my grandmother had noticed that some food would be stolen off of the back stoop or something like that at night. And so she thought there were people living in the woods, hiding. So she would go out in the fields and actually drop bread and meat and just leave it sitting on the edge of the forest, and that was during the German occupation, by the way, and that was punishable by death, doing that. So, and another thing is, and this is, just in case, the time that they come to get you usually is at night, right? If they want to arrest you, they come at night. And why? Because you're sleeping, you're disoriented. They usually know you're home. And so they just come at night, and no one's there to watch, and everybody just hunkers down and hides. So, and the Latvians knew that. They would always come for you at night. So people would just sleep in the forest at night because they don't come out looking for you. It's just an easy snatch. It's like, oh, they're not there, we're leaving. And then they come look for you another time. And in fact, my wife can tell you a story that her grandmother, they lived on a farm, and they were at the end of the road. And they had the person that was the first house on the road, if they saw lights coming down at night, they'd call everyone else so that they could leave. Right? And so, now we have cell phones. But I have news for you, though. They know everything you do with your cell phone, or they can, right? Every single thing. So don't put anything on there you're not willing to support or say is the truth, because it is. So, how many of you have heard of Alexander Solzhenitsyn? Oh, yes, even more so. Famous Russian philosopher and dissident, right? He spent time in a gulag himself. In fact, he wrote the book, The Gulag Archipelago, 1918 to 1956. And this was published back in 1973. And this is a quote from his book. And how we burned in the camps later, thinking, and meaning he was like just regretted, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, that's the police coming, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family. Or if during periods of mass arrests, as for example in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but had understood that had nothing left to lose and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. The organizations would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt if we didn't love freedom enough. And even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterward. All right, he was just questioning, why didn't we resist? We could, it's like two police officers come, they start banging on doors and they walk really loud up the stairs. And then all you do is you just sit there in your apartment and hope they're not going to knock on your door. And he's saying, what if we all would have gotten out of our apartments and just killed them, taken them out and back and buried them? Yeah. I hope it doesn't come to that. During times like this, we need to resist our human nature and embrace our spiritual nature. Man is afraid and selfish, which causes man to think of his own best interests and not about others. Matthew 15:19, for out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. This is our flesh. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Matthew 7:12, therefore, whatever you desire for men to do to you, you shall also do to them, for this is the law and the prophets. It is best to resist evil and to continue to build what is good and now, and not wait until it is too late. I would never have imagined even 5 years ago, much less 25 years ago, that I would be reflecting on my family's struggles against communist tyranny in a message in the United States that was pertinent for our time. My grandparents would be astonished. It is times like these that brings clearer understanding to God's wisdom in removing Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden so that they would not live forever. Knowing what humanity is capable of makes me grateful that the wicked will not always be with us. The Lord is sovereign over all things and will bring this all to its final conclusion. May we be temperate and faithful ambassadors for the kingdom of Christ to the end. Hold to Christ. He's the only one that could have brought them through and can bring us through times like these. And people are doing crazy things out there. They're going nuts. I mean, you hear it on the news, on your feed, on your news feed. You hear, this is crazy. I mean, why are they even doing that? They're just acting crazy because people are under a lot of pressure. And, God tells us to be temperate. God tells us to control our emotions. And we have to and we have to help others that are people under a lot of pressure because of pandemic, and governments don't let good crises or a good crisis go to waste. They immediately try to, pass some sort of legislation or do something to be oppressive. That's a sad thing. But you know what? If the wrong people are in office, that's going to happen. So the right people have to run, right? And if people let it happen, it will happen. So thank God for people who are resisting, right? It brings a balance. It brings a balance when you resist. It doesn't mean you're going to get everything you want. Just because I remember my younger days going out and campaigning for somebody, they're going to win. Look at all these people that support them. And then they lose in a landslide. And you're like, how did that happen? It's because you weren't hanging around the people that didn't like them. That's why. And somehow their machine got more people out to do the voting. So, or there was some sort of cheating going on, but I'll tell you, I will certainly agree that when elections are close, that's where it's easiest to cheat. But when there's landslides and things like that, it's much more difficult to do it without getting caught. But we can argue about that some other day. But you just have to resist. You have to resist at every corner, and you grow weary and tired. And then you have to tag team. You have to say, it's your turn. You go do it. And then you come back later. You don't say, God doesn't send people out into battle to just fight until they're dead. They're so weary that they can't fight anymore, right? There's a time for rest. There's a time for rest. And what better place than to do it right here? Come into this body of Christ and be edified, be encouraged. I heard a lot of things that who was it that said today that they would give their lung for the person that was ill, right? I would do the same. Yep. I would do the same for that person because that's what I was just saying to myself right over there when it would happen. And so I would hope you'd find the strength to do it for each other, what our needs are. And that's the Christian way of handling things. It's not going to the government and having them redistribute what everybody else owns to what you have need of. Because that was the Soviet way. They'd walk into your house, catalog everything that you own. They wouldn't take it right away. They just cataloged it all because they owned it after all. And they walked out. And then a while later, we need to take all of these things. And they'd come and take it. And it doesn't belong to you, so you better give it to them. Right? And that's, but as Christians, we should give when someone has need. Right? We should to each other. And because it'll make you more compassionate, and it will when you bless somebody, they know it. They know it. It's a blessing to you too. So there are no truer words than that. So we live in these times. So let's live for Him. Amen. Jason, if you'd come up. Very nice of you to do so, but totally unnecessary. Thank you.
Amen.